Good evening, everybody. I know the audience is dwindling and I'm talking about end of life at the end of the day. So please bear with me. I'll try to make this interesting and interactive. Now, this is one of the topics that usually generates a lot of heat. But to throw light on this kind of subject becomes a little difficult. And what I'm going to try to do is, I've been asked to speak on end-of-life care practices in the intensive care unit. So I'm going to touch upon what are the current practices in India, and also I've been requested to speak on what is the current legal status. I'm sure most of you must be knowing about the Aruna Shanbhag case, and especially many of you nurses over here would be interested. And what is our current status, and where do we stand as far as end-of-life care practices in the intensive care unit are concerned. So in the intensive care where I work, often we have to deal with difficult situations. As you know, in India, there's a real dichotomy because resources are limited at one end, and unlike in the Western world where withdrawing and withholding of life support, there is a good legal, backing for that. In India, we don't have much clarity on this. So resources are limited on one end, and we have few beds, few resources, and at the same time, we are not able to comfortably and properly practice end-of-life care for the patients. So we go on prolonging and keeping them on a ventilator and keeping them intubated, whereas these resources can be used for more deserving patients. So this is the real dilemma. So what are we talking about in the intensive care unit? Who are the patients who we mean? So any catastrophic, unresponsive, severe illnesses, patients with acute refractory conditions, advanced age with a lot of comorbid diseases, prolonged coma, any irreversible states or permanent vegetative states, incurable chronic neurological diseases, progressive metastatic cancer with not much therapeutic options left, of course post-cardiac arrest with no recovery after a couple of days, and sometimes often in our kind of situation, the patient and the family, telling us that, abhi paisa pura khatam ho gaya hai, patient is not getting better, we are from out of town. There are a lot of other social aspects that have to be taken into consideration when we are making an end-of-life care decision. So essentially, with prolonged intensive care, what happens? It delays death, results in pain and suffering without any potential benefit. A technological prolonged dying process can take away the serenity and the dignity accorded to it by the established cultural traditions and beliefs. And essentially, nature should take its own course. And that's what should happen. So what are the kind of end-of-life care practices that we're talking about? Now, one thing is full resuscitation. Okay, a patient gets hypotensive, you're going to give mild fluids, you're going to give other vasoactive drugs, and you fully resuscitate this patient. Okay, then you talk about what we sometimes call DNR, that is withholding resuscitation. Okay, so you say that if something happens to this patient, if he has a cardiac arrest, we won't give chest compression or we won't give CPR. In that sense, this is a palliative case, and this won't, the patient won't survive if he has a cardiac arrest. Then we have withholding life support. So now withholding life support is a kind of limitation. That means, now the patient is on some level of support. Now he needs dialysis. And we say, okay, we'll go this far, we won't dialyze the patient if he needs. We'll just give a Lasix infusion and we'll try, but if he needs dialysis, then we won't go ahead with dialysis. Or already he's on so many micrograms of adrenaline, but we won't escalate beyond 20. That is, withholding or limitation. That means you won't exceed a particular limit. Then you have withdrawing life support. Now he's on full ventilatory support. Okay, we say we'll just withdraw ventilation or just keep him on a TPs. In America, in intensive care units, I've actually seen them extubating the patients, and let the family sit with the patients because they're more comfortable seeing the patient without tubes and all that, and let them die peacefully, giving them large boluses of morphine. So that is completely withdrawing life support. And then we have another practice which is very popular in India, and that is what we call LAMA or DAMA, that is discharge against medical advice or left against medical advice. Now what happens in this situation is that the patient's family, they don't want to do anything, or they've run out of money, or the patient's not getting better, and you can't do anything. So, you kind of tell the patient, they'd say that, okay, we want to discharge the patient and take the patient home. Now, the doctor also feels, write it on paper and all that. Okay, we are legally very safe and fine because the patient has gone against medical advice. But this is a very, very poor way for the patient to die. And I'll come into talk about it a little in detail later. And then we have physician-assisted suicide, which you know about, which is illegal, of course. And then we have euthanasia. So these are the different kind of practices, end-of-life care practices. So now this makes it all very difficult, making the decision for a doctor, for you and me, or for a nurse, to think about, okay, there's so many family aspects, legal aspects, financial aspects. It all makes it very, very difficult, and we're all stuck in this dilemma. Now, what does the Medical Council of India tells us? So we know that practicing euthanasia shall constitute unethical conduct. Okay, so euthanasia is not legal. Now, when we talk about withdrawal of life support devices to sustain cardiopulmonary function, even after brain death, this also can be decided by a team of doctors and not merely by the treating physician. So even if you have a brain dead patient, you can't just say, okay, now end of life care for this patient. This has to be first, and this is only in the context of organ transplant. So if the patient is planned for an organ transplant and you say, okay, now he is brain dead, then fine. Then you can make an end of life care decision on him, but not just for any patient who is brain dead. And also such team consists of a doctor in charge of a patient, medical administrator of the hospital, and other doctors. So there are special doctors who are nominated to do this, and not anyone can just certify brain death. So what are the perils of end-of-life care practices as far as Indian law is concerned? So if you look at culpable homicide not amounting to murder, then withholding life support, in that context. Now brain death, acceptable diagnosis, but again, as I mentioned, only in the context of organ donation. Suicide is a criminal offence by the Indian Penal Code. Autonomy, living wills, refusal of life support has not been explored in this context. Now, abetment of suicide. So, if you're even trying to help somebody to commit suicide, even that is a criminal offence in the Indian context. So, euthanasia, physical assisted suicide is not legal. Withholding of life support will also come in this category. So, many of these things are legal in certain parts of the world, but in India, these are still not legal. So, if you look at end-of-life care practices in India, what are the kind of practices? So decisions in the Western world, if you say, are frequently performed in these kind of things in American and European intensive care units. They are performed, and it's like I said, quite a tragedy because they have a lot of resources and they also have good laws, to stop futile prolongation of life. Now, what are the reasons why it's not come up in a big way? Why are doctors very hesitant to, practice these kind of things? One is, the most important, I think, is a fear of the legal ramifications. If I start doing something or coming down on the adrenaline or making some end-of-life care decision, will I be, legally accountable? The other thing is, a lot of people are unaware of the ethical issues. Then the culture of, the Indian culture itself, okay, let us fight till the very end. Then the lack of palliative care orientation, and that's why I think this kind of CME that we have today is very, very important, because it's not just important for us as doctors to know how to treat patients, but we also have to know how to deal with patients for whom there aren't many treatment options left. So this aspect is not very well taught across the country. And pressure to admit futile cases in self-paying patients. That's another thing, in the private sector, you have patients who say, doctor, I'm paying, you continue doing the treatment. Now that also becomes very difficult sometimes in the private setup. It's futile, this dialysis is not going to work, none of this care is going to work, but you still have to continue because the patient is paying, and you're under pressures of the administrators and the hospital itself. So that also makes you prolong life and not take an end-of-life care decision. And also there's very little data available on the frequency and the manner in which end-of-life care is practiced in India. Now, this is one kind of survey that was published in the Indian Journal of Critical Medicine, and they interviewed several doctors and asked them, what they felt about, different aspects and why they would not practice end-of-life. And if you look at the part that I marked in red, law and fear of litigation, the other things were hospital policy or the practice of other social constraints, religious consent, but it seemed like doctors were most afraid of what was the legal aspect, what are the fears of any litigation, so they don't want to get into trouble and they don't want to, they may want to make that unpleasant decision to be made by somebody else and they don't want to be responsible for it. Now in Tata Memorial Hospital, we, as you know, are a tertiary cancer center, and we've tried to look at what are our end-of-life care practices, do we withdraw and withhold, life in patients in our intensive care unit? And we did this kind of survey, and this is in a 550-bed hospital, and we had 360 deaths between 1st of January to December 31st, over 1 year, and we tried to look at what were our kind of results. And in our ICU in that 1 year period, we had 18 deaths, and 106 of them died with an end-of-life care decision. Now in American ICUs, more than 90% of the patients who die in the intensive care unit die with an end-of-life care decision that is made. So this was about 33% of our patients had some kind of end-of-life care decision made, and we looked at what were the reason for initiating this. So whenever there was a patient for whom we were limiting or withholding or withdrawing therapy, we actually documented what was the reason for doing that. And if you see, the biggest cause, 62% was because